Welcome to the Heal Podcast. I'm Kelly Noonan-Goris, and every week I speak to the leading doctors, healers, spiritual teachers, and scientists to find out what is truly possible when it comes to healing. I also interview real people with extraordinary healing stories. My philosophy is, what's possible for one is possible for all. And I've discovered on my journey that so much more is possible than we can begin to imagine. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Heal Podcast. I'm so excited to interview our guest today, Dr. Judith Orloff. She is a psychiatrist, an empath, and author of the new book, The Genius of Empathy. She offers powerful skills in this book to tap into empathy as a daily healing practice in our lives and relationships. She also wrote the Empath's Survival Guide and Thriving as an Empath. Dr. Orloff is a New York Times bestselling author and a UCLA clinical faculty member. Go Bruins. She synthesizes the pearls of conventional medicine with cutting-edge knowledge of intuition, energy, and spirituality, all things I love. Dr. Orloff specializes in treating highly sensitive people in her private practice. She has been featured on the Today Show, CNN, Oprah Magazine, and the New York Times. All right, so Dr. Judith, welcome to the Heal Podcast.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here with you.
Oh my gosh. You know, it's so funny because I've always identified as an empath, a highly sensitive person. Recently I've keep hearing some people that I admire, talking about, well, empathy is, you actually don't want to be an empath. It's better to be compassionate. And there's this whole dialogue around that, right? Yeah. But that's why you wrote this beautiful book, I imagine, The Genius of Empathy, because you're giving empaths the tools to be, an empath and feel and be able to really help and be compassionate in an embodied way, but also protect themselves from burnout and absorbing that energy. So can you kind of start off by addressing that comment of, empathy is bad. You actually just want to be compassionate.
Yeah, I understand. I've heard that before. And it's interesting because in the Dalai Lama's foreword, it's just simply one page, but he uses the word compassion and empathy interchangeably. He does not make a distinction in the foreword, which I found interesting. But what I think people mean when they say empathy isn't good, compassion is better, is that too much empathy can lead to empathy burnout. And without tools such as setting boundaries and learning how to say no to people and putting up protective shields and learning self-care, empaths are just open to all of the influences and the energies out there. And so in order to be an empowered empath and empowered empathy, even if you're not an empath, just to have empowered empathy, you need to learn certain skills to protect yourself and set the boundaries. And when people are saying, well, empathy is bad, empathy without any skills can be very challenging. But the point of me writing the book is to give people skills, because the positives that you get from empathy is that I can attune to you and you can attune to me, and we can feel where each other is coming from, which is a beautiful feeling. If you empathy lover like me, it's like, oh yes, that's it. But I don't want to take on your stuff. And so I teach how not to do that, to observe, not to absorb. The compassion is more that you feel open-hearted towards somebody and you want to do something nice to help them in some way. And so it's one step back from attunement with the actual inner parts of the person, and you give in that other way. So I'm really into both of them. And it just depends on what you want. If you're too tired, you don't want to feel empathy, you can have the choice to give with compassion. If that's the biggest debate we ever have, this is the wonderful debate to have with people who are talking about what's better, empathy or compassion. Just do both and you'll make the world and your life a better place.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of attunement, when someone that I really admire, and I think they're one of the most connected, kind of like the Dalai Lama, like people that I've ever met spiritually and intellectually and otherwise. And he recently said that comment, and I was like, almost offended because I know I'm so empathic, and I'm like, I can't really help that. So it is about developing tools to protect one's own energy, right? And yeah, I mean, there's so many things we'll get into today. But maybe start with the four types of empaths. Is that something, I think you wrote about in your book, or empathy?
Yeah, there are four types of empathy, and each type is just wonderful. It just depends on what your natural predilection is. There's cognitive empathy. That's somebody who's very linear and logical and in their head, and they can have empathy for what you're going through with their minds. And that's okay. All right, that's okay. And then there's emotional empathy, where you can have an emotional attunement and connection with someone, where you feel their pain or you feel their happiness. And my happiness is your happiness. There's no greater happiness in the world. You can get into that. And so you feel mostly from your heart, but you tend to be an emotional sponge. So you have to learn how to set boundaries and not take on the emotions of other people. And then the third type of empathy is intuitive empathy, where you naturally tune into people and you can sense with your gut, you can sense with your heart, you can see images and impressions and ahas and hunches and knowings, and be open to the whole intuitive realm. That might be your default setting. And then there's the spiritual empathy, and that's people who see others through a spiritual lens. They see their highest good. They see what they're capable of in terms of giving and contributing. And they see this in a certain way. And the clergy often have spiritual empathy. Sometimes healthcare practitioners have spiritual empathy. And you could combine all the different types. We usually have one main type, but you can learn how to develop the other types. For instance, I love cognitive empathy and I love emotional and intuitive empathy. I mean, those are the ones I gravitate towards. But I was really raised as a physician. I went through 14 years of medical training. I went to USC. I went to UCLA. I worked at the Wadsworth VA hospitals. I've worked in nursing homes. I've worked in drug rehab facilities. And so, I've really had a large background where I've been able to develop empathy in different situations.
Yeah.
And it's an important thing to be able to do, because I'm presenting empathy in this book as a healing force, not just as a good idea, not just as a nice thing to do, but as a healing force in your own body and in your relationships to improve them, because relationships without empathy are, not so good. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And also how to help the world without being exhausted by all of the wars and all of the horrific things that are going on at any given time in history, really. But right now, a lot.
Oh my gosh, so much to unpack there because I want to like address every single thing. I mean, you as a psychiatrist, did you have, I feel like a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists and people interested in that field are kind of seekers themselves, and I would imagine they kind of have to be empaths because they're sitting there listening and really feeling into what the other person needs and what they've gone through. Is that true? But I guess there are different types of empaths, so maybe some are more cognitive than emotional.
And there are different types of psychiatrists too,
Yeah.
where I respect everyone. Whatever, I look at empathy as something that if you're attracted to it, you move towards it. And if you're not, you don't. And God bless everyone for finding a path that works for them. But I, had many years of training in, very conventional psychiatric settings. And a lot of the psychiatrists don't know what empaths are. And empathy might be a little too personal with patients. They might not want to do that. They might want to just do the lab results and the research findings and do medications. So it depends on what type of psychiatrists that you're dealing with. It's not like all of them are these open-hearted, empathic people. And I'm not judging them. I'm just saying they prefer to come from a different place, some of them. But I supervise residents at UCLA, and I teach them how to bring empathy and intuition into their patient care. So we talk about their patients, and most of the ones that I've met and worked with have been very open-hearted and so caring about the patient care,
Mm, yeah.
the caring people.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Um, as I was reading your book, and as we were describing the different types of empaths, um, I, I always analyzed myself as being, hypervigilant and a people pleaser as a survival mechanism to growing up with kind of like a, and I love my father. I've talked about him endlessly on this podcast, but he was kind of a rage. He'd explode. He was like a 6'4" 2-year-old that had temper tantrums because he didn't have the tools to deal with his intolerance of frustration, etc. So, and all the pressures of being a dad and working and all the things. So, is that, you know, as you were describing the empaths, and I was looking at hypervigilance and people pleasing, I mean, maybe I'm just an emotional intuitive and I'm kind of throwing my skills away as, survival mechanisms. Like, how do I know the difference between if I'm an intuitive empath, that can really feel into their environment and the people and the energy, and kind of adapt as needed, or if it's really just a skill that I developed out of survival, like hypervigilance and people pleasing.
Well, they're related. It could be both. I mean, I suspect you were a very sensitive child and that you were extremely sensitive to rage and that it had a huge effect on you. And so you had to develop certain mechanisms to survive, in addition to being an intuitive empath and open to the world and open to nature and open to animals and all kinds of magical things in life. You were open to that. And yet you had this father who was challenging. And so I think you had both. The hypervigilance is often something that empaths have when they want to make sure they're safe. They're in their environment back and forth. They're just walking down the street, but they're tracking. Is it safe here? Is it safe there? Oh, I hear a yelling man. No, it's not safe there. I'm going to turn here, to coordinate their actions so they can avoid danger. And that can come from being raised in a home that was challenging with narcissists or alcoholics or neglectful parents, whatever the challenge was, the child adapts. And so in one of the chapters in the book, I have healthy giving versus codependent giving. And healthy giving will feel good and it will nurture you. Codependent giving is when you become obsessed with other people and pleasing them and their reactions and correcting situations and calling them all the time and checking, you're always, overly observant of other people, whereas healthy giving is taking a breath, learning how to hold space for people and not doing the healing work for them and not trying to ward off danger all the time because you feel safe. You've created a lifestyle that feels safer to you and you know what to do if you meet somebody raging. Like if that's, I'm just using that because you brought that up.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever your triggers are, there's a section in the book on how to diffuse your triggers and heal the triggers because they can be a block to empathy when you're reacting that strongly. And so we all have our triggers. We all have something different. One of my triggers is being controlled, or because I had a very controlling mother. And so when that comes up in my life, I'm a lot less triggerable now because I've worked with it. But before I used to be, no, never again,
I do know very well. I guess let's talk about that a little bit. How do we, and you talk about this in your book brilliantly. So I, recommend anybody who is identifying with us right now to check out The Genius of Empathy, practical skills to heal your sensitive self, your relationships, and the world. I just spent some time in the ICU and it was like actually a positive experience. They ran this particular ICU very well, whereas I've been in other hospitals, especially recently and post-COVID, that just these poor caregivers and nurses and practitioners are so burnt out because of the system and because, so what would the skills be, or what are some practical tools that you give to, caregivers of elderly or perhaps, people with dementia, or just nurses and people on the front lines dealing in those emergency situations all the time. How do people like that who are, care for themselves so that they don't get burnt out?
Yeah, it's essential that they do. And I give workshops for healthcare practitioners on how to take care of yourself in those kinds of stressful situations, and how to bring empathy and intuition into even the ICU environment or these really intense environments with very unpleasant noises in it. I think for an empath, what gets me the most in those environments, and I have been in many of them, are the sounds. The machines and the sounds and the phones ringing, and it's so stark and bare. And, God bless those healthcare workers and the nursing staff, who are there. But it's very important. And if you're a caregiver, I was a caregiver for both of my parents before they died. So I'm quite familiar with the exhaustion that can come from giving all your heart to somebody. But one thing I had to learn, and no matter how busy one is, you have to take some time out to recalibrate yourself and at least meditate for 3 minutes, to come back to your heart, to come back to yourself, to breathe, to feel your inner self, that you don't become lost in all of these needy people who are needing something. Or if you're a caregiver for your beloved, that you're not losing every ounce of your identity in the caregiving process. You can't do that. And when the caregiving process is done, that happens, you have to withdraw the part of yourself. Let's say you gave 25%. You have to withdraw 25% back to you. So you have it. So it's not floating around where it's not needed. So it's very, very important to do that. Otherwise, the exhaustion or depression of post-caregiving can go on for a long time.
What does that withdraw the 25% back look like? So after you've been with someone or you've been on a shift 24 hours, like how do you draw your energy back to you?
You realize the caregiving time is over. Let's say they get better, or they pass on. I mean, there's no more caregiving. And so passing on, that's a grieving process. They get better and you're still tired from helping them all those months. It means you literally visualize them, and you visualize your energy in them 25%, and you say, the time for caregiving is over. I am retrieving my own energy again, completely and totally into my own body so I can be whole. And just by making that inner request energetically, it comes back to you and you'll feel it. I just got a chill as I know how real this is.
Yeah.
You have to know to ask to bring it back. Otherwise, it could stay in limbo, in the wrong place. You have to reclaim your energy again after such an intense, sacred experience, such as caregiving.
Yeah, and even just after your shift, if you're a healthcare practitioner, in the ICU or the emergency room or a surgery, or it's you just visualizing and they're like, okay, my time of giving and healing and responding is over, and I can call that back to myself. It's so simple, but it could, be so profound.
Yes, and I am a distinctly different person from my patients. I am not my patients. I am not their suffering. And I go out of this and I go into my own life where I need to sleep. I need to replenish myself in water. I need to meditate. I need to be quiet. I need to watch TV. I need to listen to music. Whatever it is you need to do, you give yourself that. And it's like an instant crash course in bringing yourself back to you. Because if you don't, that's the key. You have to remember yourself and your identity and having empathy for yourself going through all this. And also the beauty of having helped someone in this way is just beyond beautiful. It's just, you need to appreciate that in yourself, what you're giving. And yes, it's too much sometimes. And for that reason, you need to practice self-empathy. It's hard. Of course, it's hard, but I'm coming back to myself now and I can do it.
I love that because I'm thinking of parenting right now too. And I'm so blessed to have, lots of people to support me and help me in the parenting process. I only have one kid. I know people with 6 kids and no help. And I'm just like, you deserve a Medal of Honor. But even in that, there's so much talk about self-care and self-love and, I know women struggle with kind of putting themselves first, but when you talked about self-empathy in those ways in the book and just these affirmations you do, these visualizations or meditations that you provide, it really is like just again, it's just a subtle shift about thinking of things, but it's like I have to acknowledge all that I've given and really take the time to fill up my cup again. So self-empathy is like a new twist on the self-care, self-love thing, because it really is filling your cup and taking your energy back so that you can continue to show up for people empathically and compassionately and giving, generously.
It's so true. And I've had so many conversations with other healthcare providers over the years that it's so much easier to show empathy for our patients than it is for ourselves. It's a very common thing that it's oddly, you think we would love it and we would gravitate towards it, but no, we'd rather help the others. But when it comes to ourselves, beat, and that has to change with self-empathy, so that you could begin to feel who you are and have empathy for everything you've been through, the pain, the suffering, the happinesses, the joys, everything you've been through. Have empathy for what you've been through. And empathy is the sister to compassion. And you've been through a hard day. This has been such a hard day, but you've done great. That's empathy, as opposed to, what's the matter with you? You didn't do enough for this one, or you didn't do enough for that one. Tomorrow you need to be better. That's the opposite of self-empathy.
Mm-hmm. And
Browbeating.
the other thing I read as I was reading your book, you mentioned, and this is just again top of mind lately, but we've never really been taught how to feel our own emotions. So empaths, and I know myself, you can really attune to other people's feelings, but sometimes you get lost. You don't know if you're feeling their anxiety or stress or you're feeling your own. And B, sometimes empaths are so focused on other people that perhaps they're not allowing themselves to feel because they don't feel worthy of putting their feelings first. So they spiritually bypass, they, repress, suppress. So how, you mentioned in the book, but I'd love for you to share here, how do we teach empaths to feel their own feelings?
Yes. Well, you first of all have to be aware of your energy level when you're around people. I'm acutely aware of that because I really want to have high energy, and my energy can be drained by people. I'm susceptible to it. And so when I'm talking to somebody, I notice, all right, how am I feeling? How's my energy feeling? Good. Okay, very good. Or is my energy being drained? Do I feel like I'm being depleted? Do I feel sick suddenly? Do I feel like I have a headache? Am I nauseous? I have to be aware of bodily sensations, and I pay very close attention to them. Or do you feel like your heart's opening? Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel energized around someone? Do you feel like you want to hug them because they feel so comfortable to you? So you have both of those. So you want to be aware of who are the positive people in your life and have them around you as much as possible. And especially if you're going through an illness, you need to have a positive bubble, positive people, and not those that are sucking you dry. But empaths can sense that, but they need to train themselves to do it in a methodical way. If they're somewhere and they're not feeling well around someone, they need to excuse themselves and go. A great place to go is the bathroom. You could just say, excuse me, I have to go to the bathroom, and then regroup and say, what is happening? I just feel sick around that person. And everyone likes them. I don't understand it. Why am I feeling this way? Empaths often have that inner dialogue, and it doesn't matter if everyone else likes them. It matters how you feel. And empaths need to prioritize how they feel in any situation. And even if no one else has felt it in the history of humankind, doesn't matter. You feel it. And so that's why it's important.
And so I guess this is a good time to talk about boundaries. When someone feels that way, or they get an intuitive hit, or there's just an incoherence with someone's energy, or they don't feel safe in a place or with someone, what are some examples of healthy boundaries for someone that has a tendency to people please and will override that to not upset the apple cart.
Right. Well, to not say yes when you mean no. Be very clear about that. If don't first of all, don't get in a car with them, or any kind of vehicle, because whatever you're feeling is going to get a lot more intense with the doors shut and just you and them. You don't want to do that. So don't get in the car. And don't get into a long dinner. Let's say you're going to have let's go out to dinner, and you say, no, why don't we have some tea? If you need to have interaction with them, let's have some tea. So you could shorten the time limit. That's a form of boundary setting, is watching how much time you give somebody, because time is precious. You want to give it to the right people, or just give a little bit of it to certain people. I'd love to do that. I have 5 minutes. I'll listen to you. And the way you set the boundary is a very matter-of-fact tone. You notice my tone, and I'm in and out within 10 seconds. I do not get into confrontations with them. I just say, oh, I'd love to be able to do that, but I just can't. My schedule won't permit it. And so you say it, and your eyes are nice, your eyes are loving, and your tone of voice is very nice, but you're saying no. And they say, well, why, you can't do it? And I go, no, I'm sorry, I can't.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. I need that reminder. um, let's talk about forgiveness for a little bit. So I'm always just fascinated by this conversation around forgiveness. And as I was reading your book, um, you know, if you're very intellectual and you're empathic, like and someone wrongs you, betrays you, extorts money from you, just like does something unthinkable, abuses you, what, like how, the question is, I can intellectually go, okay, they had a rough childhood. I have the ability to put myself into their shoes and
Mhm.
intellectualize and kind of and understand that they're coming from their own wounds, but then like I still can't get over it. You know what I mean? So how, like how do we do that? How do we I feel like I'm just intellectualizing my empathy. I'm not really like
Mhm.
allowing myself to move on from the anger.
Yeah, well, maybe there could be a couple of things going on. Maybe you're not ready, because forgiveness or letting go of resentments, there has to be a readiness. And sometimes if it just happened, or even if it seems like it just happened, maybe you're not ready yet, and that's fine. You don't force anything when it comes to empathy. You don't. But if you are interested, if something in you is saying now's the time, I'm really interested in letting this person go and letting my resentment of them go, so they're not always in my head. You don't want them in your head. It's the
Right.
last place you want them, right?
Totally. I get it.
And so, if you are ready, you can say the what you were doing, you were trying to intellectually forgive them, and that won't work. You have to do it.
Mhm.
That's the freedom. The ticket to freedom is to really allow yourself to stretch and feel. Let's say they were abused by their father and locked in a closet, to feel empathy for that. Just feel it. That's all you have to do. And what happens? It's magical. You don't feel empathy for them hurting you. You don't feel empathy for whatever they did, embezzled you. You don't, none of that. It's just you find a little thread that you can feel empathy for. And the magic that happens is that they begin to float away from you. The little bit of empathy you can show is the key that unlocks the door to them leaving you alone, and you not holding them in your consciousness, which is, you don't want them, especially as we grow older. We want to have lightness of being, not all these things that are glommed onto us from hurts. And it's not saying that you're not totally entitled to be hurt and angry. You're not bypassing anything. You're just doing something counterintuitive, which is allowing yourself to feel the empathy for that one aspect, just that one little bitty piece. And that's enough to set you free.
Mm. I mean, again, like it's so simple, but I could feel as you're saying that it could have a
Right.
profound shift. And I've just never taken the time because I'm always up in my head,
Mhm.
analyzing, spiritually bypassing. Oh, they had a rough childhood. Their dad was a con man, whatever it is. Like they had no choice. They're living out of fear. Like I'm intellectualizing it. I need to drop down into my heart and just take the 5 minutes with each person that I'm still holding, giving up, free space in my head and emotions that are triggering me. Just really tap into, that little kernel of empathy that I can find for them and open that door. But I've never heard of, even put that way. So it's just really just dropping down into my heart and giving it that little time when you're ready. And I could feel it, like I could feel it, the ability to dissipate at that point.
It will be a
Maybe you need
step.
to do it over and over, but yeah,
No, you don't.
you don't.
You don't actually know. You can do it once.
Okay.
And then just feel what happens. It's not, the mind says, oh, the more is better, but you don't. If you do it, you'll feel the freedom of it. And if I may suggest not to do 5 in a row like that, that's too much. You do one, it's just one, and you sit with it, and you let the chemistry and the energy move, because there will be profound changes in your energy field as a result of doing this. And so you don't want to just add the list and get rid of them all in one fell swoop. You don't want to do that. You want to go slow and find the right timing. And maybe some of them you might want to do out in nature rather than inside. It might be better if you did when you're ready to find the proper environment, but you've got to slow down to do it and feel what you never thought you'd ever feel, which is empathy for this aspect of the person. And feel is the key word here.
There's that thing again, feel, that we never take the time to do. We
And
suppress, we escape, it's so good to feel that. Let's talk a little bit about, you gave a example in the book, and I think that a lot of people will appreciate this, because we sometimes have family members that rub us the wrong way, or people in our life that we can't just escape, whether it's a boss, a coworker, a family member, that we're just in the environment, we got to learn how to deal with them. And rather than try to change them, I think you gave the example of a woman that was your client who, or your patient, who had a raging husband. She was in a car with him for a long ride, and you gave her strategies and tools ahead of time to prepare her and how to react, so she didn't come from a triggered reaction. She actually had a response ready to keep herself safe when he started raging. And I love this anecdote. And I think that, if we have a family member that just like we do not get along with, that rubs us the wrong way, to go in with a strategy and a pre-prepared response from an unemotional place, so that you can have boundaries and walk away or remain loving and not triggered, but while keeping yourself safe. Can you talk about that a little bit?
yes, showing empathy. This always comes back to empathy, though, which is so odd, doesn't it? The mind goes, that's this family member, I don't like them. But it does come back to empathy if you want the freedom that I think a lot of people are interested in. But you do have a script. It's good to have a script. I do this with my patients sometimes, or I'm the family member and they're practicing their script on me. And a lot of times they can't even get it out. They can't, like, it's so sweet. And then they finally do get it out. And that's a big step. And then they go and they practice whatever the script was with their family member, and they get it out. And they pre-program themselves not to be emotionally reactive to the person, and not to get into a confrontation with the person, and to keep any conversation short and sweet, and then excuse themselves. Don't stay too long with that person. But you have to be dealing with narcissists and sociopaths. It's called the gray rock method, where you literally are emulating a gray rock. What would it be like to be a gray rock? They don't give very much. I mean, unless you really tune into them, you see that they do. But in general, people don't think they do, because they're a big blob of a gray rock. And you're just neutral. The family member says something, and you could just, this is always a good line. You could say, I hear what you're saying, and I'm going to take it under advisement. Thank you. And, in and out. You don't argue with them. You let them know that you hear them. That is so important. That's half the battle of getting rid of them, is that you let them know, I hear what you're saying and I'll take it under advisement. That's what people want. And this is just in general, so everyone can remember, with coworkers, with family members, they want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be valued. And if you could communicate that with a no, that no, this behavior isn't going to be working, for us, that's a wonderful thing to do. And just assume your family member probably will not change. It takes a lot to change, for people to change. I mean, I know as a psychiatrist how long true change can take, and it's a very devoted process. So these people probably won't change, but you can be the decider in terms of how much time you spend with them, or how you speak to them, or if you react to them. Like with narcissists, it's called not feeding their supply. The behaviors I'm talking about. Not they're like drug addicts. They love to have you upset. They love, they love that. They get fed on that. But if you're the gray rock, and if you're like, wow, I'll really give that some thought. And I have to go to the bathroom, see you later. But you say it nice, and it's not phony nice. I just want to say, you're not being phony nice. You're being Zen nice. You're making a choice to come from a very Zen, neutral place. And that's okay. You're not being phony, if anyone is thinking that.
Yeah, it's that balance of like knowing they're probably not going to change at this stage of their life, or just out of lack of awareness and no desire to change. And so it's a new strategy of being the gray rock and being Zen and loving, right? Compassionate, and understanding there's a whole series of circumstances and childhood stories and wounds and everything that led them to behave the way they do today that rubs you the wrong way. So it's this like compassionate act of accepting them and not expecting them to, having realistic expectations, and then doing what you need to do in order to maintain peace and safety.
Yes, and short interactions.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, you
brilliant.
don't. Yeah. Because a lot of empaths feel like they have to overcompensate in their interactions, or they have to give too much. They have to hear a person out, and it goes on forever, and it's too much, and it's not healthy. So what I'm saying, short interactions, maybe 10 seconds, taking the time to say what you want to say, and how you do it is more important than the length of time. You want to be in your heart. You want to be neutral emotionally. You don't want to be triggerable. The minute you start going for it with them, it's all over.
Yeah.
You lost that round. You lost. But if you can stay neutral as they're, doing whatever, pushing your buttons, and thank you for sharing that. I'm going to take it under advisement. Thank you. All right. See you later on tonight, and in and out. So that's the skill, but they don't know what hits them when you do it that way. As they expect you to get all upset. They're expecting the same dance as you've always done with them. But when you can do it the way I'm suggesting, I think you'll be very happy with the results in terms of how you feel.
Yeah, it seems like a mutually and beneficial empathic experience where you're having 10 seconds of compassion and empathy towards this person, not expecting them to change, accepting them for who they are, understanding that they're coming at you with, from wounding. And then so you give them the 10 seconds, you make them feel seen from that Zen non-reactive space, and then you do what you need to do to protect your energy. I think it's brilliant. It's so simple. And usually, in my experience, when you change your behavior and you are the gray rock, they kind of shift in the way they deal with you moving forward. And it becomes just kind of a more pleasant environment, or they kind of, move on down the river to trigger other people.
That's right. They won't be as interested in you because they're not getting their supply met.
Correct.
They
Yeah.
don't like the gray rock. They get nothing from the gray rock.
Yeah. So I love that you brought up narcissists, because I feel like it's kind of an easily thrown around word these days, in the wellness world and Instagram and everything else. Everybody's just going, oh, the easy, accusation is that this person's a narcissist. Talk a little bit about the toxic attraction between narcissists and empaths. And then perhaps, this idea that narcissists can't be healed. Like, I just can't, I don't know. I just don't believe that. I just feel like, but I'm an empath and I want to, I've been in relationships with the narcissist that extremely charismatic, had very deep spiritual seeking, and I thought that they could get there, and I just ultimately chose not to be in the relationship with them. But I feel like there's got to be a reason they're a narcissist, and perhaps some rewiring can occur.
Okay. There's a chapter in the book on empaths, on narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths. And they're under the category of empathy deficient disorder.
Okay.
Meaning that they're neurologically wired not to have empathy. They don't have empathy. Don't know how, not wired, not the, not the proper wiring to feel empathy. And so they just don't. They can present a false empathy, and they're spiritual narcissists, of course. I mean, they're rampant, but empathy, they do not feel. And they do not care about your feelings, really. You see, what narcissists are into, and sociopaths and psychopaths, they're into power. They're not into love. Empaths are into love. And someone who loves you will be into love. But that's not what narcissists are interested in. They want power over you. And that's a very different motivation than love. A narcissist will want to take your power away. Somebody who loves you will want you to find love and be in your power. That's a big difference, a big difference.
And what causes a narcissist to become a narcissist? I mean, I would imagine trauma or wounding, or is it just a neurological kind of passed down through generations of trauma that you just kind of didn't get that wiring?
Yeah, there's a lot of theories and there's a lot of research being done. So I'm very optimistic that they will have more definite answers, but they're thinking genetic, that sometimes it's passed on in families, and it's certainly behavioral. If you have parents who are narcissists and you have that as your modeling is very powerful, that it can put you in that direction if you have the predilection already for it. I don't think it could make you into a narcissist, as there are many empaths that have survived narcissistic parents who are not narcissists. But the modeling, the modeling from narcissists can be so toxic. Can be growing up with a narcissistic father or a narcissistic mother. It's so toxic. And so the modeling can create narcissists. And it's not something in a way that you can heal. I know we can have a discussion about this in the same way that you're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen narcissists go into 12-step programs and become more giving and charitable people because they're working the 12 steps, and which is being of service. And so they're forced, if they're going to stay sober, to be of service to other people, which is not from their heart, which is not something a narcissist does. And yet they can do this. And after many years of sobriety, they're much improved. I'm not saying they're cured, but they're much improved. But that's after many years of working a beautiful 12-step program, you see. But in terms of curing them, that's where many empaths go wrong. And that's where repetitive relationships with narcissists happen, because they can't believe that their love can't heal them, that there's not something you can do, something you can say, something, some behavior, some program you can get them in, something. And I've never seen it work. But that's very different than people with narcissistic traits. Some people are not full-blown narcissists. Not everyone is. They're not malignant narcissists who are empathy deficient. Some just have narcissistic traits like self-absorption and inconsideration of other people's feelings. And they can work more in therapy and they can develop a little bit more if they have traits But still, if you have a choice of who you're going to be involved with, I wouldn't go in that direction at all. But if you have no choice and there's, you're there with the person, you work with them and see how far they can go.
Um, Two questions trailing off that I want to touch on before we wrap up. But it seems like with our world in this kind of, it's a pretty ugly state. And I know we've had dark times for millennia, always been wars, medieval times, and there's been lots of dark times in our world, but it seems like we're getting very divided and vitriolic and a lot of hate and
Right.
a lot of violence. And so it just seems like, and maybe this is because we have more access to stories via social media and 24-hour media news, but it just seems like we're birthing more and more narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths. Do you have any sort of, theory about that?
Oh, I definitely agree that that's the lesson up for humanity. I mean, look at what's happening. It's hard for people to get it though, because then they go into fantasy and develop something else. But if you can see, it's all over. It's just outrageously all over the place, and so it's a lesson for us to learn in terms of what will work to steward our earth and to keep our earth safe. What will work? Will this work? No. It's a simple no. It's not even a complex no. It's a simple no. No, it won't work. I believe that empaths and people with empathy will save our world. And I believe that they're the only ones capable of being stewards of our earth because they care and they can feel the depths of the earth and the earth energy and the unification of all humankind. And I really mean that empathy can help us become one as a human family. That's very important. And so, what my work is and the book hopefully will bring humanity closer to it, as I believe in the power of individual change. When we can do some of the things that we talk about today, in our dialogue, it could change things enormously. And I opened the book with a quote by Rumi, out beyond any ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. Let me meet you there. And it's that field that I'm talking about in the book. That's what I'm interested in, is that we join not in your ideas or my ideas, but in this neutral field and begin again. We have to start again with each other and have empathy be a prime part of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just when you talk about empathy in this way, and earlier, the word grace keeps coming up. Like we don't have any, grace with people, and their humanness and their, you know, we don't allow mistakes anymore. We cancel culture, and it's that we need the empath. We do. The world will be saved by empathy and empaths because we can hold space for grace, and we can take that moment that you so generously shared earlier about finding that kernel of empathy for these people that have wronged us or doing atrocious things in the world, and really just taking that moment to have that energetic shift around them. And that brings me to, how how would you recommend a highly sensitive person to stay informed, like for instance, what's going on in Israel and Palestine or Gaza, without I haven't been able to engage really after the first 24 hours of news. I was so I can't, I don't watch evening news even much long before this because there's just so much violence and murder and just sad things happening in the world. I just can't watch it. I'm too sensitive. I used to watch Dateline all the time and now I literally can't because it's like murder and I'm too sensitive for it. So, which is interesting that I shifted and at what point did I shift? But how would you recommend to, or advise a patient to be able to get engaged and learn about what's some of these horrific things going on, but without absorbing that or without taking that on?
Yeah.
Can I
Yeah.
watch the news without absorbing, or should I stay away? What's your advice?
That's a great question. And I became aware of something in myself as you were talking, is that I can handle usually, well, sometimes all the mayhem you're talking about. If it's fiction, I could watch dramas and get very into it. But when it comes to real world, it's a whole different story for me, in terms of how I want to deal with it. But basically, I mean, empaths they jump right into the belly of the beast. They look into darkness and they jump right into those eyes. And that's the wrong approach. You don't want to do that, because that's what's happening in the world now. You don't want to do that. You want to maintain your separation from that, which means you limit how much news you watch. You don't indulge in absorbing the suffering of others and attuning with it, because it's too much for you to deal with. It's too much for anyone to deal with. You don't do that. But what you do is send people empathy from your heart. You sit at your altar, your sacred space, you close your eyes, and you send the empathy for your heart from your heart onto, the people in war-torn places. And you trust that that energy goes exactly where it needs to go. And then you're doing something for the world. Because if you're just being miserable, then it's just one added miserable person. That's all it adds. It doesn't do anything to help. And I'm really interested in helping in ways that I know will. And I believe in the power of prayer and empathy that travels beyond time and space and goes right to the person who needs a lift. Suddenly, they're hopeless. Suddenly they're like, oh, the sun's out. Suddenly they make a shift, or suddenly they get another wind behind their back. They feel like they're able to do something again. So that's the power of what you can give with your empathy across global spheres. And this isn't some esoteric practice. This is something that's very simple and it's very powerful, but it depends on your belief in what I'm talking about. And for me, my values: empathy, love, compassion, that's where it's at. That's where I'm going, not changing. That's what I value. And so I know the power, or I know at least in part the power of what we can do to share this with others at a distance.
So, and I know you just mentioned it, but I want to, because I know people listen to podcasts and then they get distracted and they got a little nugget, and I really want this to land because I do like when I cannot dive into the belly of the beast because I can, I just want to stay neutral in something that's like very volatile and I can't handle just the mere images of violence. Um, often we say, oh, you'll be in my prayers, or I'm sending love. And we say those words or we post those words, but we don't actually take the time to say the prayer or send the love. So can you walk us through so that we don't feel trite or shallow in doing it, and we actually have a practice of what is the best way to send love to someone ailing, send love to a war-torn part of the world, send love to someone who's grieving, or keep you in our prayers. What is the actual practical way we can do that, so we're not just saying it? It's not lip service.
Great question. Well, it's about, having a sacred space at home, really simple, with candles and flowers and maybe fruit or spiritual objects, and meditating there on a regular basis. But if you want to send love to the world, you go there by yourself and you close your door and you light your candles and you sit there and connect to your heart. And that you begin to open your heart by focusing on the loving kindness within. And then you literally feel the energy moving from your heart and send it. Let's say you want to send it to, I don't know, Siberia, let's say, or someplace very far away, the Orkney Islands in Scotland. So you just send it, and it goes from your chest and it travels, and you don't have to do anything. It knows exactly where to go. And it's going to go to those war-torn regions in its own way, the way it travels, and it's going to go exactly where it's needed. And you're going to feel very good about that as you sit there and you do this, because you will feel the truth in this and your ability in a very simple way, simply by yourself, not with a big group. That's a different thing. That's okay, but that's a different thing. But by yourself, just know you have the power to give this gift. And a beautiful practice that will make you filled too. It will fill you with empathy in what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I often, when I take the time to, if someone is sick, which often so many people reach out to me all the time, and I've had, I have, it's heavy, so I have had to learn to allow people to have their healing journey, and I can't do the work for them. So just really offer up what I can, but really know that I can't, I can only do what I can. And but I think in that taking that time in that sacred space, connecting with your heart, and then if someone's battling a disease or really suffering, like just really visualizing either them healed, and taking that time and sending that love and that image, visualizing them, because in some way, in some reality, that's an actual quantum possibility, right? And tapping into that and putting energy towards that vision, and then sending the love, but actually doing the visualization as well. That's kind of something that I do.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. And then you continue your own meditation. You don't have to leave the sacred space then, but it has been done. You don't have to keep giving a little more and a little more. Just once is fine.
Once is fine, okay. Good. Good to know. I like this. You're very efficient, and you're very efficient in your practices.
I know
Um,
the power of this. I mean, I really do believe in the power of what I'm talking about, because a little love goes a long ways.
It really does. I'd love for you're a best-selling author, The Genius of Empathy, which I read and highly recommend to everybody. Again, just for these practical tools that you're giving us and these skills to protect ourselves and also help us to heal the world and our relationships, which we all know is necessary right now. Can you just tell me, you wrote The Empath's Survival Guide and Thriving as an Empath, and now The Genius of Empathy. How do the three books differ, or kind of describe each one, just so people can, maybe they'll get all three, or maybe they'll tap into two of them?
Oh, yeah. Well, the Empath Survival Guide is a primer for if you've never realized you're an empath, you know what it means, and techniques to use to feel good as an empath. And Thriving as an Empath is the day at a time book. It goes through the seasons and the year, and it offers each day a self-care technique for empaths and what to practice each day. One page, that's all it is. One page per day, so it's not this long tome, but it's something to do every day. I love that book, and the seasons and the changing season. I love all the books, but I love I talk about time and the seasons and going from January 1st to December 31st. And some people have been reading it for years, a couple of years since it's been out. Every year they start over again. And then The Genius of Empathy, which is about practical tools to apply empathy, whether you're an empath, whether you're just an empathic person, wonderful empathic person, how to apply it in your life as a healing tool to heal your body, to heal your relationships, to heal the world. As we've talked about a little bit, what can you do? What's the proper mindset? How can you activate certain energies? How can you shift relationships with empathy rather than intolerance and polarizing and everything we do in the greater sphere, when we do in our relationships? And so how can we bring more empathy into our relationships? Very practical tips. This is what you do when you're arguing with your spouse. This is how you apply empathy. And, you take a pause, little step back. Don't say things you regret, and so there's very practical. And there's a section on caregiving, and there's a section on letting go of resentments, and so they don't eat you up. And then self-empathy, there's a chapter, and what's healthy giving, what isn't. So it'll give you practical tips in all these areas, so you know what to do, and you'll have your script before you go in the place, and you'll know what to do, which will give you a lot of power.
Yeah, it's so good, guys. The Genius of Empathy. Again, life always brings me these beautiful gifts and resources and interviews at the exact time I need it. So thank you so much for your work and these, again, just practical skills that are so subtle but so profound. where can people find you, and where can people order these books?
Well, my website is drjudithorloff.com, and I'm going on a book tour, and I will be giving some in-person events in Venice, California, in all around the country, and some online events. So I invite you all to join the empathy discussion. We need these kind of dialogues, and the how to bring it forth in our world and create the shift. And so drjudithorloff.com.
Awesome. Yep. Everything will be in the show notes for you guys. And yeah, thank you so much. This has been an awesome conversation. So helpful.
And I've enjoyed it a lot.
Oh, awesome. All right. Take care.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the Heal Podcast. Be sure to tune in every Thursday for more empowering wisdom and inspiring healing stories. And make sure you hit the follow button on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss that one episode that holds the answer you've been searching for. And please rate and review us so that we can grow and reach more people. Thanks so much, and be well.